The night I realized my marriage might be a performance, I was sitting alone under a string of golden rooftop lights, staring at two untouched glasses of champagne and a candle that had already burned halfway down. It was our 5th wedding anniversary. The wind off the Chicago River was sharp enough to sneak beneath my coat, but I stayed in my chair anyway, fingers wrapped around my phone, reading Daniel's last message over and over as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less insulting. Emergency meeting. Boston client flew in early. I hate this. Don't wait up. I'll make it up to you. That was Daniel Harper. Always polished. Always regretful in exactly the right tone. Always just believable enough. If anyone had asked me that morning, I would have told them I had a good marriage. More than good, actually. Solid. Enviable. The kind people pointed to when they complained about how impossible it was to find a loyal, ambitious man in Chicago. My husband was successful, handsome without trying too hard, and disarmingly calm in every room he entered. He worked in corporate development, spent his days in glass offices and private meetings, and had the kind of confidence that made older men trust him and younger women notice him. I had noticed him too once. I had mistaken that smooth certainty for safety, and for 5 years, I built my life around that belief. I was the one who remembered birthdays, booked holidays, sent thank-you notes, and chose the perfect gifts for his mother. I knew how he liked his coffee, which tie he wore when he needed to charm a boardroom, and exactly how quiet to be when he came home in one of his strategic moods. I defended his late nights. I excused his distracted silences. I told myself this was what adulthood looked like when you were married to a man with real pressure on his shoulders. That night, I had worn the dark green dress he once said made me look unforgettable. I had left work early, had my hair done, and even arrived 10 minutes before our reservation because I wanted to be sitting there when he walked in. I wanted him to see me first. I wanted, for one stupid, hopeful second, to feel chosen. Instead, I watched other women get kissed hello. I watched waiters deliver celebratory desserts to couples who leaned toward each other like the rest of the city didn't exist. I watched the hostess look at me twice, with that softened expression women reserve for each other when humiliation is happening in public. At 7:15, I told myself his flight had been delayed. At 7:40, I ordered sparkling water because drinking champagne alone on your anniversary feels pathetic in a way I wasn't ready to accept. At 8 o'clock, I finally answered the waiter when he gently asked whether my husband would be joining me. No, I said, with a smile so controlled it almost frightened me. He won't. Even then, I wasn't angry yet. Not fully. I was embarrassed. There's a difference. Anger is clean. Embarrassment is intimate. It settles into your skin and makes you suddenly aware of how visible you are, of how many people have already guessed the truth before you're ready to say it aloud. I paid for the dinner he never attended. That detail stayed with me longer than it should have. The black card he'd once insisted I keep in my wallet for anything important looked cold in my hand under the restaurant lights. I signed the bill with perfect handwriting, thanked the staff, and walked to the elevator with my spine straight, my chin lifted, and my stomach twisting so hard I thought I might be sick before I reached the lobby. Outside, downtown Chicago glittered like nothing cruel had ever happened there. Cars slid past in reflections of silver and red. A couple laughed beside the valet stand. Somewhere down the block, a saxophone was playing for tips, the notes rising into the cold night air with an ache I felt in my throat. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and called Daniel. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. Then, because marriage teaches you to negotiate with your own instincts, I opened our message thread and typed, "I hope the meeting goes well. We missed our reservation." I looked at the sentence for a long time before sending it. Not because I wanted to send it, because I wanted proof of who I had been in that moment. Patient. Reasonable. Giving him every possible chance to tell me the truth without a fight. When I got home, the apartment was dark except for the city light pouring through the living room windows. The flowers he'd had delivered that afternoon were still on the kitchen island. White roses. Expensive. Predictable. There was also a handwritten card leaning against the vase. To my beautiful wife. 5 years down, forever to go. I stared at it until I laughed. Just once. Quietly. It wasn't a happy sound. I slipped off my heels, set down my purse, and walked through our apartment as though I were entering someone else's life. Everything looked the same. The framed vacation photos. The cashmere throw folded over the couch. The decanter Daniel never used but liked displaying because it made the place look masculine and finished. Our bedroom door half open. His cufflinks in the tray. His side of the closet arranged with military precision. A marriage can begin to rot long before it smells different. At 9:23, my phone lit up. Daniel. For one reckless second, relief hit me before sense did. I answered on the first ring. Laura, hey. His voice was low, smooth, slightly rushed. I just got out. Absolute disaster of a meeting. I said nothing. Babe. I looked out across the city from our living room window at all that glittering glass and distance, and felt something shift so quietly inside me that if I hadn't been listening for it, I might have missed it. How's Boston? I asked. There was the smallest pause. Then he said, warm and effortless, cold. Miserable. You know how it is. I closed my eyes. Because I didn't know how it was. I just didn't know yet how much. I didn't sleep that night. Daniel came home a little after midnight smelling like expensive cologne and hotel soap, the kind too clean to belong to an airport or a conference room. He kissed my forehead while I pretended to be half asleep and whispered, I'm sorry, baby. I know tonight mattered. I kept my breathing even. Then he went into the bathroom, and a few seconds later I heard the shower turn on. I lay there in the dark, staring at the faint line of light under the bathroom door, and replayed that tiny pause before he answered me on the phone. That fraction of a second when I had asked him how Boston was, and he had needed to remember his lie before stepping back into it. People talk about betrayal as if it arrives like thunder. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it slips into bed beside you, warm and familiar, and asks if you're still awake. The next morning, Daniel was charming. That should have been my first clue that he knew exactly how disappointed I'd been. Men who feel innocent usually defend themselves. Men who know they've crossed a line tend to become generous. He brought me coffee in my favorite mug. He kissed my cheek while I was standing at the kitchen island, still in my robe, pretending to scroll through emails I hadn't read. I've cleared Saturday, he said. No calls, no meetings, no interruptions. I'll take you anywhere you want. We'll do the anniversary properly. I looked at him over the rim of my cup. He was wearing a navy suit, perfectly tailored, with his watch catching the morning light. Clean-shaven. Composed. The same man I had introduced to people for years with quiet pride. And suddenly, I had the strangest feeling that I was looking at a photograph of him rather than the man himself. A beautiful image. Smooth surface. No depth I could trust. You don't have to make up for it, I said. His expression softened in that practiced way that used to work on me every time. I want to. Then he left for work, and I stood in our silent apartment with my coffee cooling in my hand, trying to decide whether I was becoming paranoid or finally becoming honest. At 11:17, my phone buzzed while I was in my office reviewing a campaign deck I could no longer focus on. It was Megan. Not a text. A photo. No caption. No warning. Just an image that filled my screen so suddenly that for a second I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my whole body went cold. Daniel. There was no question it was him. He was stepping out of a black car in front of the Langford Grand, one of those old-money luxury hotels downtown where politicians held fundraisers and discreet people held meetings they never mentioned later. He had one hand at the back of a woman's waist. Not formally. Not politely. Intimately. Like it belonged there. The woman beside him was tall, dark-haired, and stunning in the polished, expensive way that made people turn their heads without realizing they had. Cream coat. Heels. Sunglasses oversized enough to suggest she didn't want to be recognized, which only made her more noticeable. Her face was half-turned, but not enough to hide the smile on her mouth. I knew before Megan told me that this was not business. Then the message came under the photo. Laura, I am so sorry. I was across the street coming out of a client lunch. I saw him and nearly dropped my phone. I took this immediately. I didn't want to call until you saw it first. A second message followed. The woman is Olivia Carter. I read the name 3 times. Then once more. Everyone in certain Chicago circles knew the Carter name. You didn't have to move in their world to hear it. Richard Carter's real estate empire was stamped across half the skyline. Hotels, commercial towers, redevelopment projects, charity galas, business magazines. Money so old and so entrenched it had become civic architecture. Olivia Carter wasn't Richard's daughter. She was married to his son. I called Megan before I had time to think. She picked up immediately. Laura? My voice didn't sound like mine. Are you sure that was today? Yes. No hesitation. Less than an hour ago. And you're sure it was Daniel? Laura. Her voice dropped, careful and steady. It was Daniel. I sat back in my chair and stared through the glass wall of my office at people moving normally through their day. A copywriter laughing near the printer. Someone balancing salad and a laptop. A life continuing, indifferent and bright, while mine seemed to tilt under me. Do you know her? I asked. Not personally, Megan said. But I recognized her. Everyone does. She's all over event coverage and charity boards. She married Ryan Carter 3 years ago. Big society wedding. Huge family name. I swallowed. My mouth felt dry. Maybe it was a meeting. Silence. Megan let me say it. She let the lie humiliate itself in the space between us. Finally, she said gently, Does that look like a meeting to you? No. It looked like familiarity. It looked like secrecy that had gotten lazy. It looked like my husband escorting another man's wife into a hotel in the same city where he had told me he was flying to Boston. I opened the photo again after we hung up, forcing myself to study every detail. Daniel's hand. Her smile. The hotel awning. The timestamp Megan had included without meaning to, visible in the corner of the image. 11:06 a.m. Chicago. Not Boston. Not delayed. Not trapped in an urgent meeting. Just here. Close enough to touch. I should say I cried then. It would be the softer version of events, the more graceful reaction. But I didn't cry. I became very still. There is a point in certain kinds of pain where emotion freezes before it bleeds. That was what happened to me. I set my phone face down on the desk, folded my hands in my lap, and sat absolutely motionless while something colder than heartbreak settled into place. Because the photo did more than prove Daniel had lied about one night. It changed the shape of the entire marriage behind me. Suddenly, every delayed flight, every last-minute dinner, every carefully worded apology became unstable. Every memory had to be lifted, turned over, and examined for rot underneath. I wasn't just looking at infidelity. I was looking at structure, planning, practice. By the time I left the office that evening, I knew 2 things with complete certainty. The first was that Daniel Harper had not accidentally betrayed me. The second was that I would say nothing until I understood exactly how deep it went. Once you see the first crack, the whole wall starts to look different. That was the strangest part of the days after Megan sent the photo. Nothing in my life actually changed on the surface. Daniel still came home every evening around 7. He still kissed my cheek when he walked through the door. He still asked about my work, my clients, my deadlines. But now every detail felt rehearsed. I stopped reacting. I started observing. It's amazing how much you can notice when you're quiet. 3 nights after the photo, Daniel stepped onto the balcony during dinner to take a call. That alone wasn't unusual. He had always claimed he preferred speaking outside because the signal in our apartment building was terrible. For years, I had accepted that explanation. That evening, I watched through the glass. His back was turned toward the living room, shoulders slightly hunched in the way people stand when they're saying something private. The city lights reflected off the balcony railing, and every few seconds he glanced over his shoulder toward the door. Toward me. Not casually. Carefully. I kept eating my pasta like I hadn't noticed. When he came back inside, his expression was perfectly relaxed. Sorry, he said. Client in Singapore. Time zones. I smiled. Of course. The lie landed between us like something small and poisonous. After that, the memories started rearranging themselves. Once you suspect someone, your mind becomes a historian. It goes backward through the months, collecting moments that once felt harmless but now carry weight. There had been the sudden business trips. In the first few years of our marriage, Daniel traveled maybe once every 2 months. Mostly predictable conferences or meetings scheduled weeks ahead. We planned around them easily. But about 6 months ago, the trips had started appearing out of nowhere.
Boston.
New York. Dallas. Always urgent. Always last minute. Always explained with the same apologetic tone. Just 2 nights. Investor dinner. Closing meeting. I wish I could get out of it. I remembered one night in particular in late autumn. We had been watching a movie when his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, stood up immediately, and said he needed to step outside for a second. 10 minutes later, he came back inside, already reaching for his coat. Something came up, he said. I need to fly to New York in the morning. At the time, I had simply helped him pack. Now that memory felt different. The secrecy.
The speed.
The fact that he hadn't mentioned the trip again after returning. Then there were the dinners. For most of our marriage, Daniel loved eating at home. He said restaurants were loud and exhausting after a long day of meetings. We cooked together often. Simple meals. Pasta, roasted vegetables, wine. That had slowly changed. Client dinners began appearing 2 or 3 times a week. He would text around 6. Running late. Dinner with investors. Don't wait up. Sometimes he came home smelling like expensive whiskey and hotel lobbies. Other times he arrived completely sober but distant, as if part of his mind was still somewhere else. I had explained it away as pressure. Ambition. The price of building a bigger career. But the biggest change had been quieter.
Distance.
Daniel had always been calm, but he used to be present. He asked questions. He listened when I talked about work. He remembered small things. Over the past few months, that attentiveness had faded. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact became rarer. Sometimes I would be talking and notice he was staring past me, thinking about something entirely different. Once, while we were having breakfast, I caught him smiling down at his phone. Not a polite smile. A private one. When he noticed me looking, he flipped the phone face down on the table.
Just work, he said.
At the time I had accepted it. Now that moment replayed in my mind like a surveillance recording. The more I remembered, the colder I became. By the end of that week, I had stopped asking him where he was going. Not because I trusted him, because I wanted to see what he would volunteer. Friday evening, he walked into the apartment loosening his tie, looking slightly distracted. I might have to travel next week, he said casually. Where? Boston again. The word hung in the air between us. I studied his face. Same smooth confidence. Same relaxed posture. No hesitation. Daniel Harper had become very comfortable with Boston. I nodded slowly. When? Probably Tuesday, he said. Quick turnaround. I turned back to the stove and stirred the sauce like the answer meant nothing. But inside my head something was shifting from suspicion to calculation. Because once you stop reacting emotionally, patterns become clearer. And Daniel had developed a pattern. Secret calls. Frequent trips. Hotel meetings. And now a woman whose name carried the weight of one of the most powerful families in Chicago. Olivia Carter. I hadn't even begun to understand why they were together. But one thing had already become obvious. This wasn't new. This was simply the first time I had been allowed to see it. Once suspicion enters your marriage, even ordinary memories begin to feel staged. About 2 weeks after Megan sent me the photo, I remembered something I had pushed aside months earlier. At the time it had seemed strange. Now it felt like evidence. It was a Saturday morning in early spring. Daniel had already left for the gym, and I was cleaning the kitchen when I noticed his laptop bag sitting on the chair by the dining table. Normally, he never left it behind. Daniel treated that bag like a second passport. It traveled with him everywhere: office, meetings, airport lounges. Seeing it abandoned felt unusual enough that I picked it up to carry it into the study. When I lifted it, Something thin slipped out of the side pocket and landed on the floor. A folded receipt. I almost ignored it. But the paper had that thick, glossy texture luxury stores use, the kind that immediately tells you whatever was purchased inside cost more than most people's monthly rent. I unfolded it. The store name at the top made my stomach tighten. Vander and Hale Jewelers. One of the most expensive jewelry boutiques in Chicago. Under the store logo was a single item description. Platinum diamond bracelet. Then I saw the number. $180,000. For a moment, I honestly thought I had read it wrong. I checked again. $180,000. I stood there in the quiet apartment staring at the receipt like it was written in another language. Daniel and I were comfortable financially, but we weren't reckless. Purchases that large weren't normal. They weren't casual surprises. They were decisions. And I knew with absolute certainty that Daniel had never given me a bracelet like that. At the bottom of the receipt was the purchase date. 3 days earlier. I folded the paper again and slid it back into the pocket exactly where I had found it. At the time I told myself it was probably a client gift. A corporate purchase. Maybe something he had been asked to help arrange for one of his investors. The explanation wasn't perfect, but it was easier than asking a question that might lead somewhere unpleasant. So I said nothing. A few weeks later, Daniel took me to dinner for my birthday. It was an elegant place near the river, one of those restaurants where the lighting is soft enough to make everyone look younger and more in love than they really are. Halfway through the meal, he reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. "For you," he said. I remember smiling automatically. Inside the box was a diamond bracelet. Beautiful, delicate, sparkling under the candlelight like it belonged in a museum display. For a second, I simply stared at it, because I recognized it. Not the bracelet itself, but the idea of it. The receipt flashed through my mind so quickly it felt like someone had turned on a light behind my eyes. Daniel watched my face carefully. "Do you like it?" he asked. I lifted the bracelet out of the box and let it fall gently against my wrist. "It's incredible," I said, which was true, but my voice sounded strange to my own ears. Too measured.
Too calm.
Because something about the moment felt wrong. The receipt I had found weeks earlier suddenly made his gift feel delayed. As if the bracelet had been waiting somewhere before arriving at this dinner table. I looked up at him. "When did you buy it?" He didn't hesitate. "A few weeks ago," he said easily. I wanted to make sure it arrived in time for tonight. The answer should have settled everything. Instead, it sharpened my unease. Because I remembered exactly when that receipt had fallen out of his bag. And that had not been a few weeks ago. It had been almost 2 months earlier. At the time, I convinced myself I was overthinking. Daniel had never given me a reason to doubt him before. A small timeline mistake didn't mean anything. Maybe the bracelet had been custom-sized. Maybe the store needed extra time. I accepted the gift. I kissed him. I thanked him for being so thoughtful. But now, sitting in my office weeks later with Megan's photo burned into my mind, the memory of that bracelet felt completely different. Suddenly, the timeline mattered. Suddenly, the delay mattered. Suddenly, the question I hadn't asked that night began echoing louder in my head. Because there was another possibility. One that fit much better with a man walking into a hotel with Olivia Carter. What if the bracelet had never been meant for me? What if I had only received it after Daniel realized I had seen something I shouldn't have? And most disturbing of all, what if somewhere in Chicago there was another woman wearing the exact same diamonds first? Once a doubt settles in your mind, it starts connecting things you didn't even realize were related. For almost a week after remembering the receipt, I said nothing. I wore the bracelet Daniel had given me once, briefly, while getting ready for work, studying the way the diamonds caught the light in the bathroom mirror. It was beautiful in the way very expensive things usually are, perfectly balanced, flawlessly bright, designed to make people notice. But I couldn't shake the strange feeling that it didn't belong to me. So I placed it back in the velvet box and left it inside my jewelry drawer. Then one Thursday evening, the final piece fell into place. Daniel had invited me to a corporate charity gala. It was one of those polished Chicago events where every guest looked carefully effortless. Black tuxedos, sleek gowns, quiet conversations about investments and development projects. The ballroom was full of people who understood money and power the way musicians understand rhythm. I moved through the room with Daniel's arm resting lightly at my back, smiling when introduced, shaking hands with strangers whose names I would forget the moment the conversation ended. Eventually, Daniel was pulled away into a group of executives near the bar. I drifted toward a table with a few women discussing a hospital foundation fundraiser. I didn't know them well, but these events always worked the same way. Polite introductions, brief small talk, careful social navigation. At some point during the conversation, one of the women lowered her voice slightly. "Did you hear about the Carter situation?" Another woman leaned closer. "Which one?" "Olivia." The name moved through me like electricity. I kept my expression neutral, lifting my glass slowly, as if nothing had changed. "What about her?" someone asked. The first woman shrugged lightly. "Nothing dramatic. She just didn't show up tonight. Richard Carter is hosting a big development announcement next week, and people expected the whole family to be here." Someone else laughed softly. "Olivia never misses a chance to be seen." The women continued chatting, but I had already stopped listening. Olivia Carter, the name that had appeared under Megan's photo. The woman Daniel had escorted into a hotel while telling me he was in Boston. I excused myself quietly and stepped away from the group, my heart beating slower rather than faster. Not panic. Focus. I moved toward a quieter corner of the ballroom, pulled out my phone, and opened Instagram. It didn't take long to find her account. Olivia Carter didn't keep a low profile online. Her page was filled with polished photographs from charity events, art shows, luxury vacations, and rooftop dinners that looked suspiciously familiar. She had the kind of social media presence people build when they know cameras are part of their life. I scrolled. Dinner parties. Fundraisers. Weekend trips to Aspen. Then I stopped. The photo had been posted 3 weeks earlier. Olivia was standing on the terrace of what looked like a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. She was wearing a black silk dress and holding a champagne glass, her dark hair falling perfectly over one shoulder. But that wasn't what froze me. It was her wrist. A bracelet. Platinum. Delicate. Covered in diamonds. For a moment, I felt like the air had quietly disappeared from the room, because I recognized it instantly. The same design. The same setting. The same pattern of stones that I had stared at under candlelight on my birthday. I opened my jewelry drawer in my mind, remembering the weight of the bracelet Daniel had given me. Then I looked back at Olivia's photo. The caption under the image read, "Perfect evening." The timestamp was clear. The photo had been posted the exact same night Daniel claimed he purchased my birthday gift. The exact same night the receipt from Vander and Hale said the bracelet had been bought. I zoomed in on the image until the diamonds blurred slightly under my thumb. There was no doubt. Not similar. Not inspired by. Identical. For several seconds, I just stood there in the corner of the ballroom while music and conversation moved around me like distant noise. Then something inside me finally settled. The bracelet Daniel gave me had never been meant for me. He had bought it for Olivia Carter. And when he realized I might have discovered the receipt, he simply gave it to his wife instead. After that night at the gala, I stopped doubting myself. Before, there had still been a small voice trying to defend Daniel, trying to explain things in ways that didn't destroy the version of my marriage I had believed in for 5 years. That voice disappeared the moment I saw Olivia Carter wearing the bracelet. From that point forward, I wasn't confused anymore. I was simply quiet and observant. Daniel noticed the calm first. A few days later, we were having dinner in the apartment when he studied me across the table with a faint crease between his eyebrows. "You've been quiet lately," he said. I shrugged lightly. "Busy at work." He watched me for a moment longer, as if trying to measure something he couldn't quite identify. "Everything okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Of course." He nodded slowly, but I could tell he wasn't completely convinced. People who lie often develop a strange sensitivity to silence. They begin searching for reactions that never come. That made my next decision easier. If I wanted to understand how deep this betrayal went, I needed information. And the first person I thought of was Daniel's mother. Susan Harper had always been warm with me. Not overly affectionate, but supportive in the steady way older women sometimes are with daughters-in-law they approve of. She invited us to Sunday lunches. She remembered details about my work. She once told me Daniel had never been more stable than after marrying me. So I called her. "Laura, sweetheart," she said warmly when she answered. "I was just thinking about you. How are you?" "I'm okay," I said quietly. There was a small pause on the line. "What's wrong?" That was all it took. I let a little uncertainty enter my voice, just enough to sound vulnerable, but not dramatic. "Daniel's been distant lately," I said. "More trips. More late nights. I probably sound ridiculous, but it's been bothering me." Susan sighed softly, the sound full of gentle understanding. "Oh, honey, that boy has always buried himself in work when things get busy." "I know," I said. "I just needed someone to talk to." "You did the right thing calling me," she replied immediately. "Daniel adores you. Truly. Sometimes men just get distracted with business. It doesn't mean anything." Her voice was so reassuring that for a moment I almost believed her. Almost. "Have you noticed anything different with him?" I asked carefully. "No," she said quickly. Then her tone softened again. "Laura, if something were wrong, I would tell you. Your family."
Family.
The words sounded comforting in theory. But when I hung up, I still felt unsettled. Not because of what she had said, because of how quickly she had said it. Still, I tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe I was becoming suspicious of everyone now. Maybe the situation with Daniel had simply shaken my ability to trust. 2 evenings later, I stopped by Susan's house unexpectedly. I had been nearby after work and thought it might be nice to visit. She lived in a quiet neighborhood north of the city, in a neat brick home that always smelled faintly of lavender and furniture polish. When I arrived, her car was already in the driveway. The front door was unlocked. "Susan?" I called as I stepped inside. No answer, but I heard her voice from the kitchen. At first I thought she was talking to the television. Then I realized she was on the phone. "I'm just saying you need to be more careful," she was saying quietly. I froze in the hallway. Her voice carried clearly through the open doorway. "You can't keep meeting Olivia in places people recognize," she continued. "Chicago is a small world when you're dealing with families like the Carters." My heart stopped. There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke. Then Susan sighed. "Yes, I know Laura trusts you," she said. "But that doesn't mean you should get sloppy." The kitchen suddenly felt miles away and inches away at the same time. Because there was no question who she was speaking to. Daniel. And there was no question what she was helping him hide. I stood perfectly still while Susan continued speaking in that same calm, practical tone. "Just keep things discreet until everything settles," she said. "The last thing you need is Richard Carter discovering this mess before you're ready." Another pause. Then her voice softened. "I'm only trying to protect you, Daniel." Something cold and sharp settled inside my chest. Not shock. Not heartbreak. Recognition. Susan Harper hadn't been comforting me when I called her. She had been managing me. Managing the situation. Making sure I stayed calm while her son continued an affair with Olivia Carter. And suddenly, every reassuring word she had spoken to me 2 days earlier sounded completely different. "Your family."
No.
I wasn't family. I was simply the wife who hadn't figured it out yet. The strange thing about betrayal is that once it becomes undeniable, the pain changes shape. Before that afternoon in Susan's hallway, I had still been carrying a quiet ache inside my chest. The kind that comes from realizing the person you trusted most in the world might not be who you believed. But when I heard her voice on the phone, calmly advising Daniel how to hide his affair with Olivia Carter, something inside me settled into place. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. I left the house without letting Susan know I had been there. I closed the front door gently, walked down the driveway, and sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. Not crying. Not shaking. Just thinking. Because if 2 people were lying to me, there was a very good chance they were lying about more than one thing. And if Daniel believed I still trusted him, that gave me something extremely valuable.
Time.
That evening when he came home, I greeted him exactly the way I always had. Asked about his day. I poured him a glass of wine while he loosened his tie. I listened while he talked about some acquisition his company was supposedly negotiating. Daniel had always been confident when he spoke about work. Numbers, partnerships, development deals. He moved through those conversations like a man completely in control of his world. Watching him now was different. Because every time he mentioned a client meeting or a travel schedule, I found myself wondering if Olivia Carter had been sitting across the table. Or beside him in another hotel room. Later that night, when Daniel was asleep, I took my phone into the living room and called Megan. She answered on the second ring. "Laura? I need your help," I said. My voice sounded steady, even to me. "What happened?" she asked immediately. I told her everything. The bracelet. Olivia's photo. Susan's phone call. The quiet moment when I had realized Daniel's entire family was helping him hide the affair. Megan didn't interrupt while I spoke. When I finished, the line stayed silent for several seconds. Then she said one sentence. "Okay. Then we stop reacting and start preparing." Those words changed the direction of my life. The next afternoon we met for lunch at a small cafe near her office. Megan arrived with her laptop already open and a look on her face I had never seen before. Focused. Strategic. "I made a call this morning," she said. "To who?" "A divorce lawyer." I blinked. That was fast. "Laura," she said gently, "your husband is having an affair with the daughter-in-law of one of the most powerful families in Chicago. You don't investigate something like that without legal protection." She turned the laptop toward me. On the screen was a name. Rachel Kim, family law specialist. "She's very good," Megan continued, "and very discreet." 2 days later I sat in Rachel Kim's office for the first time. Rachel was sharp in the quiet way intelligent people often are. Early 40s. Precise voice. The kind of person who listened carefully before saying anything. When I finished explaining the situation, she leaned back slightly in her chair. "Have you confronted your husband yet?" she asked.
No.
Good. That answer surprised me. Rachel folded her hands on the desk. "Right now your husband believes you trust him," she said. "That's an advantage. The moment you confront him, that advantage disappears. So, what do? We gather information." The way she said it made the process sound almost clinical. Evidence. Financial records. Travel confirmations. Communication patterns. "Affairs are rarely just emotional problems," Rachel explained. "They often overlap with financial decisions, business relationships, or legal vulnerabilities." I felt a small chill run through me. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said calmly, "people who feel protected in one secret usually become careless in others." That was when the plan began. Megan helped me review Daniel's travel patterns. Rachel began quietly examining public business filings connected to Daniel's company. And I started doing something I had never done in my marriage before. I paid attention to every detail, every late-night message, every sudden trip, every unexplained meeting. Daniel still believed he was living with the same patient, trusting wife he had always known. What he didn't realize was that the woman sitting across from him at dinner had stopped being his victim and had quietly become his investigator. Once you start looking at someone's life like an investigation instead of a marriage, the details begin to organize themselves differently. For the first 2 weeks, nothing dramatic happened. Daniel continued his routine as if nothing in our world had shifted. He left for work at the same time every morning, texted occasionally during the day, and came home with the same calm expression he had always worn. But now I was documenting everything.
Dates. Trips. Calls.
Rachel had told me something during our second meeting that stayed in my mind. "Infidelity alone can help in a divorce," she said. "But financial misconduct changes everything." At the time, I didn't fully understand what she meant. Then Megan found the first irregularity. We were sitting in her apartment on a Sunday afternoon, her laptop open between us, while she compared Daniel's recent travel dates with public business announcements. "You said he works in corporate development, right?" she asked. "Yes." "So most of his job involves acquisitions, partnerships, investment deals? Exactly. Megan nodded slowly. Then explain this. She turned the screen toward me. It was a press release from a mid-sized development firm in Chicago announcing a new investment partnership. Normally, I wouldn't have paid attention to something like that, but one detail caught my eye immediately. The investment group listed as the financial partner had a name I had never heard before. Lakebridge Capital Holdings. Does that mean anything to you? Megan asked.
No.
That's what I thought. She clicked into another window and opened a corporate registration record. Lakebridge Capital Holdings had been registered just 8 months earlier. The registered business address wasn't a large office building. It was a small suite in a commercial building downtown. And the registered financial director listed on the document made my stomach tighten. Daniel Harper. That's not his company, I said slowly. Exactly. Megan clicked through a few more records. Your husband works for Hudson Development Group, she said. So, why is he listed as financial director for a completely separate investment company? I didn't have an answer, but Rachel did. 2 days later, I sat across from her again while she reviewed the documents Megan had found. Rachel's expression became more serious the longer she studied the screen. This could be very significant, she said finally. Why? Because Lakebridge Capital appears to be investing in several development projects that involve Hudson Development Group. I frowned slightly. That's Daniel's company. Exactly. She leaned forward. If your husband is secretly involved in an outside investment company that profits from deals his primary employer is making, that's a major conflict of interest. My mind started connecting pieces. But how does Olivia fit into that? Rachel clicked into another document. Because Lakebridge Capital doesn't only appear in Hudson projects. She pointed to another investment record. This time the partner company wasn't Hudson Development. It was Carter Real Estate Holdings. The name hit me immediately. Richard Carter's empire. The same family Olivia Carter had married into. The same family Megan had mentioned the first day she sent the photo. I felt a slow chill run through my chest. You think Daniel and Olivia are involved in these deals together? Rachel didn't answer immediately. Instead, she opened another page Megan had sent earlier. This one listed the shareholders of Lakebridge Capital. There were 3 names. One was Daniel Harper. The second was someone named Michael Rains. The third made the room feel suddenly smaller. Olivia Carter. For a moment, none of us spoke. Because the implication was suddenly very clear. Daniel wasn't just having an affair with Olivia. They were working together. Secretly. Financially. Rachel leaned back slightly in her chair. If these investment projects involve money from Carter Real Estate, she said slowly, and if those funds are being redirected through shell companies like this. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Millions, Megan whispered. Rachel nodded once. Yes. I stared at the name on the screen again. Olivia Carter. Daniel Harper. Partners. Not just in an affair. In something far more dangerous. And for the first time since Megan had sent that photo outside the hotel, I realized something even more unsettling. Daniel hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been building an entirely separate life. One that involved secret companies, hidden investments, and a woman whose family had no idea what she was really doing behind their name. Once we uncovered the financial connection between Daniel and Olivia, everything moved faster. Not emotionally.
Strategically.
Rachel was the one who said it first during one of our meetings. You don't just expose an affair like this, she said calmly. You time it. Megan looked up from her laptop. Time it for what? Rachel folded her hands together. For maximum damage. That sentence stayed with me. Because for the first time since this entire nightmare began, I realized something important. Daniel believed he was smarter than everyone around him. Smarter than his company. Smarter than the Carter family. And definitely smarter than me. That arrogance was the only reason he had been able to build his secret life so comfortably. It was also the reason he was about to destroy it. The opportunity came 2 weeks later. Daniel mentioned it casually over breakfast. I'll be in Chicago next Thursday night, he said. Investor meetings. That alone wasn't unusual. What caught my attention was the next sentence. I might stay downtown. Early meetings Friday. I looked up from my coffee. Which hotel? He shrugged lightly. Probably the Lakeside Grand. Megan and Rachel exchanged a look when I told them later that afternoon. That's perfect, Megan said quietly. The Lakeside Grand wasn't just any hotel. It was one of the Carter family's most prestigious properties, owned directly by Richard Carter's real estate group. Daniel and Olivia won't expect anyone to suspect something there, Rachel explained. It's one of their usual meeting places, isn't it? Yes, I said. We had already confirmed that through Daniel's past travel patterns. Every time Olivia appeared in Chicago during one of Daniel's business trips, the Lakeside Grand appeared somewhere in his schedule. That was when the plan began. Step 1 was simple. I told Daniel I would be leaving for a 3-day marketing conference in San Francisco starting Wednesday morning. He didn't question it. Didn't hesitate. In fact, he seemed relieved. That's great, he said. Good opportunity for you. He even drove me to the airport. He kissed me goodbye at the security line like a man completely confident that his wife was flying across the country. Instead, I took a taxi back into the city. Step 2 involved the Carter family. Rachel had already been preparing for that part. She quietly contacted a legal representative connected to Richard Carter's office and arranged a confidential meeting. When they heard what we had discovered, Lakebridge Capital, the hidden investments, the connection to Olivia, they became very interested. Very quickly. Because if Daniel and Olivia had been diverting money from Carter real estate projects through fake investment partnerships, the amount could easily reach several $1,000,000. And Richard Carter was not known for tolerating financial betrayal. Step 3 was the most delicate. Timing. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear over Lake Michigan. From the window of my hotel room across the street, I could see the entrance of the Lakeside Grand perfectly. Megan sat beside me, watching the street below. You okay? She asked quietly. I nodded. I've never been more calm. That was the truth. The fear had disappeared days earlier. Now, everything felt inevitable. At 7:42 p.m., a black car pulled up to the hotel entrance. Daniel stepped out. Even from across the street, I recognized his posture immediately. Confident. Relaxed. Certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. 10 minutes later, another car arrived. Olivia Carter stepped onto the sidewalk in a long black coat. She didn't even look around before walking into the hotel, because she believed the same thing Daniel did, that no one was watching. But inside the Lakeside Grand lobby, several people were waiting. One of them was a senior executive from Carter Real Estate. Another was a private financial investigator. And one floor above the lobby, Rachel Kim was sitting in a conference room with a folder full of documents. Bank transfers, corporate filings, investment records connecting Daniel Harper and Olivia Carter to millions of dollars quietly redirected through Lakebridge Capital. I watched the hotel entrance for several minutes after Olivia disappeared inside. Then I stood up. Ready? Megan asked. Yes. Because for the first time in months, I knew exactly how this story was going to end. Daniel Harper believed he was meeting his lover for another secret night in a luxury hotel. What he didn't know was that both of their worlds were about to collapse in the same room. Daniel always believed he understood how power worked. That night proved he didn't. I entered the Lakeside Grand 10 minutes after Olivia. The lobby looked exactly the way it always did: polished marble floors, soft gold lighting, quiet conversations floating through the air like nothing dramatic could ever happen in such an elegant place. But the tension was already there. You could feel it beneath the calm. Megan stayed behind near the entrance while I walked toward the private elevator that led to the executive conference level. Rachel was waiting upstairs. So were two men from Carter Real Estate. And somewhere in that building, Daniel Harper was walking toward a meeting he believed was going to be very different. When I stepped into the conference room, Rachel glanced up from the table. He's already here, she said quietly. And Olivia? Rachel nodded. They arrived together. Of course they did. For a moment, I stood near the window overlooking Lake Michigan. The water outside was dark and endless, the city lights reflecting across the surface like broken glass. 5 years of marriage had brought me here. 5 years of trust, patience, loyalty. 5 years Daniel had apparently spent building another life beside mine. Rachel closed the folder in front of her. Are you ready? I thought about that question carefully. Not angry, not shaking, just ready. Yes. Rachel opened the door. The room next door was larger, designed for corporate meetings. Long table, leather chairs. Soft lighting meant to make negotiations feel civilized. Daniel was standing near the center of the room when I walked in. Olivia Carter stood beside him. Two executives from Carter Real Estate sat at the far end of the table, their expressions calm but cold. For a moment, Daniel didn't react. He simply stared at me like his mind couldn't quite process what he was seeing. "Laura," he said finally. His voice held genuine confusion, which almost would have been funny if it hadn't taken so long to get there. "You told me you were in San Francisco." "I was supposed to be." The room stayed very quiet. Olivia was the first one to recover. Her eyes moved quickly between me and the Carter executives. "What is this?" she asked sharply. One of the executives slid a folder across the table. "You can start with that." Daniel opened it. I watched his face as he began flipping through the documents. First confusion, then recognition, then something close to panic. "These records are incorrect," he said quickly. "There's been some misunderstanding." The executive didn't raise his voice. "Lakebridge Capital Holdings," he said calmly. "Registered 8 months ago." He tapped the page. "You and Mrs. Carter appear to be directing investment funds connected to several Carter real estate development projects." Daniel's mouth opened slightly. "That's not." 3 shell companies," the executive continued. 4 redirected investment accounts." He leaned back in his chair. Total estimated amount diverted so far, $6.8 million. Olivia went pale. "That's impossible," she said. The second executive spoke for the first time. "You might want to explain that to Richard Carter." The room fell completely silent. Daniel turned toward me slowly. "You did this," he said. I met his eyes. "No," I said calmly. "You did."
His voice was louder now.
"You set this up." I shook my head slightly. "I didn't destroy anything, Daniel." I gestured toward the folder in his hands. "You built this." For the first time since I had known him, Daniel Harper looked small. Not angry, not confident, just exposed. Olivia sat down slowly in one of the chairs, her hands trembling slightly. Because the truth was finally unavoidable. The affair, the secret companies, the stolen money, it had all arrived in the same room. The consequences came quickly after that. Daniel lost his position within a week. Federal investigators began reviewing the financial records tied to Lakebridge Capital. Susan Harper's involvement, specifically her assistance in helping Daniel conceal certain transactions, became part of the investigation as well. Olivia Carter lost something even more immediate: her marriage. Ryan Carter filed for divorce less than 2 months later. And Chicago society has a very long memory when it comes to public scandals. As for me, my divorce from Daniel was finalized the following year. The settlement allowed me to walk away with financial independence and something far more valuable: freedom. Megan and I started our own marketing firm not long after. It began small. 2 desks, 1 office, a handful of clients who trusted us. 5 years later, the company had grown into something much larger than I ever imagined. Successful, stable.
Mine.
Life has a strange way of balancing itself over time. 3 years after the scandal, I attended a real estate conference in Chicago as a speaker. After the presentation, a man approached me near the stage.
Tall. Calm.
Familiar in a way I couldn't immediately place. "Laura Bennett," he said with a small smile. I looked at him for a moment before the recognition clicked. Ryan Carter, Olivia's former husband. "Yes," he said when he saw the realization in my expression. Life has a sense of humor sometimes. We talked for almost an hour that afternoon. Then we had dinner a few weeks later. Then another. And eventually something quiet and genuine began to grow between us, something that had never existed in my marriage with Daniel. Honesty. Respect.
Peace.
Years later, people still sometimes ask me if I regret discovering the truth that night. If I wish my marriage had never collapsed. But the answer is simple. I didn't destroy Daniel Harper. He destroyed himself. All I did was finally open my eyes.